This is a response video to America Uncovered's video, Is Fake Meat the Future of Food? This is part 2 of 3. Part 1 is in the description down below.
Although real meat can also be pretty processed and have unhealthy additives like sodium nitrate and sodium phosphate. For people concerned about cholesterol, fake meat has almost no cholesterol. But if you're avoiding meat for your heart, just know that fake meat often has more sodium. Depending on the brand, plant-based meats might also have lower levels of some nutrients, such as zinc, vitamin B12, and iron. A Duke University researcher looking at the differences said consumers should know real meat and alternative meat products are not nutritionally interchangeable, even if the numbers on the nutritional labels look the same.
I wrote over this, link in the description if you want to actually look at the, find the study. Also, the New York Post, which Chris Chappell was reading from, pretty much just copies and pastes from the actual study. But we're going to look at the actual study. The name of the study is Lab Analysis Finds Near Meat and Meat Not Nutritionally Equivalent. Before we continue, metabolites is a substance formed in or necessary for metabolism. Core Lab compared 18 samples of popular plant-based meat alternatives to grass-fed ground beef samples from a ranch in Ohio. The analysis of 36 carefully cooked patties found 171 out of the 190 metabolites they measured varied between beef and the plant-based meat substitute. The beef contained 22 metabolites that the plant substitute did not. Plant-based substitutes contained 31 metabolites that the meat did not. So this entire article, it's not analogous. Basically, they found some of the healthiest beef they could find, grass-fed beef, when in reality that's not even the average of what most people would eat. You know, most people probably get their food from factory farms, judging by how the Sentient Institute estimated, what was it, 90%, 99% of food raised in the United States is in factory farms, 90% of the world is factory farms. Even if they're biased, even if that's half, that's an insane amount of food. Nearly half of people's food is raised in frickin' factory farms. They're raised in goddamn shit pens. So basically, and even with that being said, even with the fact that it wasn't a fair comparison, that they were finding popular plant-based meats, not the healthiest plant-based meats. They should have been comparing the healthiest meats to the healthiest grass-fed beef. The animal-based meats had the advantage because of the fact that it was the healthiest beef that they could get, grass-fed beef, in comparison to animals living in shit pens. And there were still 9 more metabolites found in plant-based meats in comparison to animal-based meats. And this is incredibly suspicious because of the fact that they didn't talk about the importance of this in this paper or the potential benefits from the metabolites that were not found in animal-based meats. This paper merely focused on what was not in plant-based meats, but they didn't really focus on what was not in animal-based meats, and that is my problem. This paper, more or less, I don't know how anyone's really going to be taking this paper seriously just by reading how it was done and what they focused on, which is incredibly suspicious. So more or less, they talk about the different types of nutrients that they found within animal-based meats, and they come to these nutrients have potential important physiological, anti-inflammatory, or that's basically mean immune system. So we're just gonna say immune system roles. The authors said in the paper. So one of my problems with this is when you actually look at control trials of people eating a plant-based meal and eating a meat-based meal or a meal with some meat in it, there's actually a reduction in inflammation with control trials when looking at people with arthritis. And for anyone who does not know, control trials are very promising forms of academic data, some of the most promising forms of academic data. It ranks very highly on the hierarchy of evidence, and in these trials, people on a vegan plant-based diet had lower levels of inflammation. In fact, there's been a correlation with lower levels of inflammation with plant-based diets for a long time now. So sure, are there some sort of anti-inflammatory aspects to animal-based meat? Sure, but you also need to then look at the inflammatory aspects. Or you could look at the control trials of people eating a plant-based meal and a meal with animal-based products. And a control trial means that you're basically comparing apples to apples in a study. Or in short, it means that you're controlling for X factors when comparing two different types of situations. Any primary nutrient you can get from animal-based foods, you can get from plant-based foods. So bringing up how animal-based foods can help boost your immune system, I don't think it's very relevant or help with immunitory roles or however I can remember, I never am able to pronounce that word that they use. So when it comes down to it, the most common food for food poisoning from the CDC is animal-based foods. Some foods are more associated with foodborne illness and food poisoning than others. They can carry harmful germs that can make you very sick if the food is contaminated. Raw foods of animal origins are most likely to be contaminated, specifically raw or uncooked meat and poultry, raw or lightly cooked eggs, unpasteurized raw milk, and raw shellfish. Fruits and vegetables may also get contaminated. While certain foods are more likely to make you sick, any food can get contaminated in the field during processing or during other stages in the food production chain, including through cross-contamination with raw meat in kitchens. So when it comes down to some of the very common foodborne illnesses with animal-based products, Campylobacter, Salmonella, C. perfringens, E. coli, and Yersinia, or however you pronounce it. I never pronounce it properly. A lot of these foodborne illnesses are from either fecal matter or they're found within the intestines. So it's either shit or piss and shit trash food, realistically. So getting down to it, and the reason why I bring this up is because if the argument is that animal-based products help boost our immune system or they help with our immune system, even if it was the case it helped with our immune system, you have to keep in mind they're also more likely to make us sick at the same time. So is the boost even worth it? And when we can get all the same nutrients from plant-based products, I don't think the risk is worth it, especially when you include the every other cost, including the moral cost, the environmental cost, and the health cost, as well as the cost of the lives lost because of animal agriculture from foodborne illnesses. In this mini review focuses on foodborne illnesses and outbreaks caused by food-producing animals. So within this review, contaminated foods resulted in 600 million cases of foodborne disease and 420,000 deaths worldwide every year. The world population is 7.8 billion and 56 million people die every year. And of those 56 million people died, well, that estimate, approximately 7.5 annual deaths a year is from foodborne illnesses. And it's important to remember that this is an increasing number. However, despite these regulations, the number of foodborne illnesses is continuously increasing. Products manufactured from food-producing animals are considered the major cause of bacterial foodborne illnesses. This estimate came from the World Health Organization of 420,000 deaths a year. The mini review got its approximate deaths per year from Our World in Data. Cases of deaths. So this was published in 2018 and was last updated in 2019. So if you look here at this chart, if you combine alcohol use disorder and drug use disorder, even if you were to combine the two, it's still not as many deaths as foodborne illnesses. And something else that I find very interesting is that foodborne illnesses most likely beats homicide. Or perhaps I should hold my tongue on that, because world and totalitarian governments might be suppressing the amount of total homicides in the world. But I don't think it would be silly to say that foodborne illness kills around similar numbers to homicide, because both homicide and foodborne illness might be difficult to get absolutely accurate numbers. Approximately 4 million people get foodborne sickness in Canada. That's 1 in 8 Canadians. 11,600 of them are hospitalized. 238 deaths. Now, something to keep in mind is if the argument is that animal-based meats help protect our immune system, I wonder how many people's immune systems actually are compromised from foodborne illnesses for a period of time or permanently after the foodborne illness has passed, which is majority caused by animal-based products. You might be asking yourself, why? Why are people dying from foodborne illnesses? Well, when it comes to Campylobacter, Salmonella, C. perfringens, E. coli, and Yersinia, all these types of foodborne illnesses are found from either bacteria within the intestines or from fecal matter. So, and this is transferred during some point of the animal's life or through slaughter. So for one reason or another, these types of bacteria are commonly found on animal-based products. When it comes to plant-based products, a common issue is cross-contamination with animal-based products. With Salmonella, it's quite often found on plant products because they're either washed or because they're watered with Salmonella. And the people that are most at risk from these types of illnesses, for Campylobacter, Salmonella, C. perfringens, E. coli, and Yersinia, the most common people that are vulnerable to it are children, usually under the age of 5, the elderly, or people with weak immune systems. They could be one of the following or all of them, and I'll go into more detail on this on another video. When it comes to kidney disease, it's actually known to be caused sometimes from E. coli. E. coli has the potential to actually shut down your kidneys or damage your kidneys. And when it comes to the subject of, say, inflammation, these types of foodborne illnesses have the potential to cause inflammation. So if you want to help boost your immune system and reduce inflammation, consider not eating foods that also contain fecal matter or potential piss or other things found within your intestine. Don't eat piss and shit food. There's a certain level of cognitive dissonance with what we're willing to eat. So, for example, if I dropped a piece of broccoli on the ground and if my friends and family saw it, and if it fell in some shit, if I washed it off, and if I cooked it really nicely to the point where it's edible, like let's say it fell on some dog shit or some cat shit, whatever shit's on the floor, I think a lot of people would personally judge me for it. I don't think that'd be considered socially acceptable to do. But it's socially acceptable to do that with chicken, cows, and pigs and other types of foods that are literally incubating the bacteria of actual shit, of actual intestine fluids, of actual intestine bacteria. So the point I'm trying to get here is I wouldn't be surprised if someone took away a child from an adult because they're cooking food that fell on the floor, that fall on feces and other type of bacteria. Yet it's perfectly normal to feed children and families animal-based products that are literally covered in feces or covered in actual intestine fluids or bacteria. The real point I'm trying to drive home here is what disgusts people tends to have a bit of cognitive dissonance because people were traditionally raised eating these type of animal-based products. They don't think of what they consider disgusting and what they consider acceptable. Something's disgusting just because they weren't culturally normalized to it. So it is important for consumers to understand that these products should not be viewed as nutritionally interchangeable, but that's not to say that one is better than the other. Said Van Vellet, a self-described omnivore who enjoys a plant-heavy diet but also eats meat. Plants and animal foods can be complementary because they provide different nutrients. Yeah, definitely doesn't sound like he has a particular bias. He said more research is needed to determine whether there are short-term or long-term effects of presence or absence of particular metabolites in meat and plant-based meat alternatives. Here's the thing, this entire article is just bringing up some facts and just bringing up some differences to try and make an argument as to why people should eat animal-based meats, when in reality, none of these types of nutrients, all these nutrients you can get from somewhere else. I have no issue with any scientist talking about metabolites found in meats, animal-based or plant-based, and stating that they're not nutritionally interchangeable. However, he's avoiding the issue of the negatives of animal-based meats, and I would make an argument that that is irresponsible if he cannot make an argument as to why he should promote the positives and how it outweighs the negatives. Because if he can't bring up the negatives of animal-based meats and explain why it's outweighed by the positives, then I would make the argument that he's irresponsibly promoting a type of food that is correlated and has potential causations for a large number of chronic diseases. I'm just going to restate what I said in part 1. Animal-based meats don't raise a high bar. Plant-based meats could be infinitely better or worse for you. And if you want to be ideally healthy, I'd recommend to not eat either of them. Okay, so in short, I think this paper was very biased. Okay, so I guess I'll first talk about salt. So this is a meal planner. And you can calculate your meals with this, and this is what you should be using. So I actually used to cook without any salt, without any sauces, because I thought it'd be ideal for heart health. Turns out I was anywhere between 70 to 90% deficient on my salt. So I'm actually going to just put in one of these, boom. It's actually healthier levels now, and I'm going to put in just a little bit more from Gardein ground beef. So this is just a little bit of mock meat added. It actually puts my salt up to healthy levels. Basically, you just need to be mindful of what you're putting in your food. And how do you do that? You should either get a blood test or track your calories and minerals. And ideally, do both. How about you track some of your meals once a day, once a month, or once a week, just to get a rough idea of what you're eating. So even if you're a little bit deficient, you're just going to be relatively healthy. So here's the thing. All these plant-based meats have 100 calories, and the animal-based meats, I just gave the hamburger 1,000 calories. And there's still going to be some deficiencies within vitamins and minerals. So this is a message to the audience, not necessarily America Uncovered and Chris Chappell. Animal-based meats are not a multivitamin, and neither are plant-based meats. So even if you're eating a large amount of animal-based meats, and we're just going to look at hamburgers for a second now, you're still going to need to get vitamins and minerals from somewhere else. And let's just look through the salt of all the plant-based meats. We're just going to be looking at the salt really quick here. It's not enough to really kill you, in a small portion. Like, just don't eat it in like large, insane portions to begin with. And the thing is I don't think you should be eating either plant-based or animal-based meats in large portion to begin with, and I wouldn't advocate for that. So right now, I'm just going to drive this home as a point. So we're going to look at the hamburger ground beef. It tends to have the most B12, most zinc, and most iron. So here we go. 40% iron, 24% zinc, B12, 43%. So I'm just going to look at yives. So yives, insanely more B12, insane amount of zinc, a bit of iron. And when you look at all these plant-based meats, you'll actually notice that there's a bit of salt, but it's never like an insane amount, like 50 or 60 or 70% of salt. It can almost always, from my experience, fit within a healthy diet. I haven't seen a plant-based meat with like an insane amount of salt. I'm sure they exist, but yeah. So when it comes to Gardein right here, Gardein ground beef, because we were just looking at yives, it has way more iron, and also it has a shit ton of B12. To be charitable, Chris Chappell and America Uncovered, yes, the reality is plant-based meats might not have the sufficient amount of zinc or iron or B12 that someone may have been getting from animal-based meats before. There was no point to really bringing up iron or zinc, regardless of the nutritional absorption rates, which may vary. The reality is when it comes down to it, each plant-based meat is different, and he even says this later on in his video. So to me, this just comes across as a means to try and grab a low blow or a very weak criticism against plant-based meats. When it comes down to it as well, if we look at just fiber and B1, and sometimes even B2, B3, B5, and B6, sometimes plant-based meats have drastically more of those vitamins, as well as fiber, and sometimes more B12. Because just like that article we looked over earlier, both Chris Chappell and America Uncovered and the article that they found are just looking at the negatives of plant-based meats. They're not looking at the positives of plant-based meats in comparison to animal-based meats. It's amazing what you'll find doing research for a video like this. There was a control trial, which was a crossover trial, which is where you get somebody to eat something for a few days, and then you get somebody to eat something for a few days. And you don't have two different groups of people. And because of that, you can measure the changes within one individual, because you're getting one individual to do one thing for a set period of time, and then another thing after a set period of time. So within this control trial was for 8 weeks. So basically what ended up happening in this trial is you had two different diets. One diet where they would eat their animal-based meats, and then another diet where they would actually substitute most of their animal-based meats with plant-based alternative, plant-based meats, and then they would test to see how their health scores were. Among generally healthy adults contrasting plant and animal intake while keeping all other dietary components similar, plant products improved several cardiovascular disease risk factors, including TMAO. There were no adverse effects on risk factors for plant products. So when this paper says no adverse effects on risk factors from plant-based products, what they're essentially saying is they didn't find anything negative from eating these plant-based products. It might not be a perfect example or the perfect trial because it was for a short period of time, keep in mind. So something else I need to say really quickly here, and this is all in the discussion, which is at the bottom of the study, is that they did include fish and chicken, but it was small amounts of fish and chicken. Fish was not allowed within 48 hours of blood sampling, which should have eliminated its effects on serum TMAO concentration. Found that by replacing meat with protein, conversing plant alternatives, Americans could satisfy key nutritional requirements while eliminating pasture lands use and reducing cropland, nitrogen fertilizer use, and greenhouse gas emissions in addition. So basically right here, they're saying that you could actually be nutritionally adequate, replacing some of your meat-based foods with plant-based meat foods. In light of growing consistent recommendations to reduce red meat intake for optimal cardiovascular health, plant-based meat offer a potential health alternative. Notably, their growing popularity among consumers have been coupled with rising critics of ultra-processed compositions and potential adverse health consequences. Until now, there has been a paucity of data upon which to elevate these claims. Basically means lack of evidence. Paucity. That's what it means, paucity. Lack of evidence. Just think of it like a small amount. This study found several beneficial effects and no adverse effects from the consumption of plant-based meats. If you actually go over here and click this supplement figure 1, you can actually download a chart. So we're going to actually take a look at the chart, and we're actually going to see the changes in somebody's bodies and the nutrients and so forth. When the New York Post reporter brought up that meats aren't necessarily interchangeable with animal-based meats and plant-based meats, the thing is that's not a strike against plant-based meats inherently, because of the fact that you'd have to compare the actual absorption rates between plant-based meats and animal-based meats. And when you look at these two tables here that are showing all the nutrients that people got on these crossover trials, you see there's certain things, like in the first table, you see the protein is the exact same, or just about the exact same. But there's certain things such as minerals and vitamins, such as folate, calcium, and iron, you actually notice on both tables people tended to actually get more of, as well as the fact that when you look at the actual saturated fat and cholesterol, you'll actually notice that there's actually less saturated fat and cholesterol in both groups, a slight decrease in saturated fat and a very noticeable decrease in cholesterol. To really drive home the point, the whole nutrition not necessarily being perfectly interchangeable between plant-based meat and animal-based meats, vitamin A was better in both groups for people that were consuming meat on both of these tables. And when I was talking about folate, iron, and calcium, people that were consuming a plant-based meat tended to do way better. So the reality is, from the results, from just the nutritional content of vitamins and minerals and so forth, it doesn't really matter if these products aren't necessarily nutritionally interchangeable. Both of them can have a decent amount of vitamins or minerals. In some areas, people consuming animal-based meats do better. In some areas, people consuming plant-based meats, people do better. The reality is, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's nutritionally interchangeable or not when you look at the results. When it comes to cholesterol, saturated fat, and salt, you can overall improve your health risk when it comes to those three factors by taking out animal-based meats and introducing plant-based meats, so long as you pay attention to the amount of salt within your plant-based meat and you don't use an excessive amount.